Hello and welcome to this very special 50th episode of GLI Live. I am Donna Cryer. I am your host for these episodes. I am also the founder and CEO of the Global Liver Institute. I just want to say thank you so much to all of our listeners, our watchers, our guest speakers, our experts, and to all of our founding supporters. We would not have made it to this 50th episode without all of you. And I hope you wait until the end of this episode for a very special tribute we'll be making to all of our previous guests. But today I want to start with a conversation on evolving COVID-19 response, because that's how this all started as the Global Liver Institute's COVID-19 response to give actionable information to patients and caregivers, to bring communities closer. And we've invited back one of our favorite guests and partners, Dr. Martha Dawson, who is the 13th president of the National Black Nurses Association and the Sparkman, she's a scholar in the Sparkman Global Health Program at the University of Alabama, to have us have this conversation on both looking back and moving forward. Welcome, Dr. Dawson.
Thank you so much. It is exciting to be here. And I heard you say that this is your 50th episode. So congratulations on that wonderful benchmark there, I think. And I'd just like to put in a short plug for the National Black Nursing Association, because this year we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. So I feel like we have a 50 by 50 going on today.
That's fantastic. For those of you who watch, you know that I turned 50 during this pandemic, much like your august organization. I hope I wear as well. You all are a fantastic force for good in this country and in this world, and I have looked up and admired to your leadership for all of these years, personally and professionally. So congratulations on your 50 years and your partnership.
Okay, thank you so much.
Fantastic. So I wanted to dive right in because we had so much left to talk about in our first conversation, and so we spoke a lot about the situation for communities of color at the beginning of this public health crisis. Bring us up to date on what has worked and what hasn't worked in providing health equity to communities of color in particular.
I think the one thing that has definitely worked is the fact that now we have more African Americans and Blacks that are getting the word out and spreading information about COVID-19. Last year, after we had our conversation, I was fortunate enough to represent MBNA as one of the convening organizations with the Black Coalition Against COVID. Mm-hmm. And this group consists of the 4 historical Black medical schools, the National Association, the National Medical Association, that is, the National Black Nursing Association, and the Urban League, and also in collaboration with blackdoctor.org. And we've also have had many others to join us in making sure that we can hold town hall meetings with African Americans, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and scientists that looks like us and understand where we're coming from. And that, I think, really began to move the needle in terms of getting information out to our population. Right. Because early on in the pandemic, we had some information, I would say at that time, probably around about 10 or 20%, because information is factual information that we can back up with knowledge and data and science. But then I would say we probably had a good 30% that was misinformation.
Mhm.
Misinformation is people putting information out there and they don't know that it's incorrect.
Right.
And they're not doing it intentionally, but they're doing it. But I would say probably about 60% of the information was also disinformation.
Mhm.
And disinformation is when someone know that they're putting out incorrect information and they don't have the knowledge, the background, the skill set, the data, nor the science to back them up. So we had to spend a lot of time working on dispelling the disinformation, correcting the misinformation, and actually giving out information in our communities. And so that's what the Black Coalition Against COVID we've been able to do. And we're still holding those town hall meetings. We probably have had up to about 12 now. And we've had Dr. FACHE, we've had Dr. Nunez Smith, and we've had other scientists that have spoken to us and physicians, as I stated. And in addition to that, the National Black Nursing Association, we've also been convening throughout the 114 chapters, communicating at the local level. I have one chapter that since January the 2nd, the very first Saturday in January, even up to today, every Saturday, they've been on the radio, educated. But in between those Saturdays, they've been out there, again, making sure that security, working with food bank. They've been, once the vaccine is available, out there vaccinated. We've had chapters that have given out 1,000 vaccination in 1 week. So we have definitely been on the front line, not only in the education arena and in the advocacy arena, but also in the service, which is what we are so well known for, is our service. And so we was one of the ones early when we realized there was not a nurse on the Biden-Harris team to look at the transitional piece for the vaccine and COVID. We voiced our opinion with that. When we talk about healthcare, the healthcare in terms of maternal and infant healthcare in the United States is very dismal for the African American population. So we signed on with the Mama Bus bill that has gone through the House and Congress. So we're always out there advocating.
Mhm.
We're in the education arena, in the practice arena, as well as in that research space, because many of our members
Mhm.
also participated in clinical trials. So again, we've been trying to do and touch base in all different areas that we can to make a difference. And that's our goal at this time.
So those are three very important parts. The the education and information, and I've been so impressed with videos from the members of the National Academy of Medicine of color who have talked about the importance of science, the importance of these vaccines, the importance of trustworthy, credible information delivered by trustworthy, credible messengers, people sharing their own vaccine experience. I've been vaccinated twice, very safely, even with all of my concurrent conditions, and so I encourage others to do so. And then, your action in communities, whether vaccinating people or helping them to get the other types of care that they need, and then following that up with advocacy, so that there is, the policy, the infrastructure for all of these public health services that were needed before COVID, needed during COVID, and will be needed after this pandemic recedes into a more regular, but not dissipated or disappearing challenge for us all. And so that's so very important that people understand how all three pieces fit together. GLI has a similar model that we're growing into as we grow up. So I wanted to touch on the vaccine issues just a little more deeply in terms of now that in almost every state, everyone 16 and above or 18 and above is eligible to get a vaccine. And many states are shifting from a registration model to more mass vaccination sites, community-based vaccination sites. What's it going to take to get those who have not yet been vaccinated, how to make sure that they have convenient, accessible opportunities to be vaccinated, if they don't have transportation issues, if they can't take time off work, how are we going to go that sort of last mile for people?
I think, again, we're going to have to continue to have that federal presence, I think, at the national level. And I must say that I do appreciate the effort that the Biden and Harris team has been making, along with Dr. Fauci and his scientists and others.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things we're going to have to continue to have is that voice at the community level, so that we can listen to what is taking place at that community level and understand, are there reasons why certain people may not be accepting the vaccination? And one of the things that I really try to dispel is when people make these general comments, and they may say something like, well, we had a vaccine site open and the African Americans did not show up. Well, we have to go back and look at the rollout of this.
Right.
Because when many African Americans started showing up, what they felt is that there was other majority individuals in front of the lines in front of them. Okay? And they were trying to figure out, we don't see you in our community on a regular basis, but why are you here now taking the vaccine that we could have taken?
Right.
And then, yes, I've had reports from different, again, remember I said we have 114 chapters, and we're in 34 different states plus DC.
Right.
So when I'm speaking to my members and I'm hearing the same similar stories that, well, they had this in the Black community at one of our Black high schools. And people started lining up at 6 o'clock in the morning, but they only had 200 vaccines to administer. And you have thousands of people there. And then the same thing happened again at that site. Then you hear on the news that someone says, well, we was at this site, but no one is showing up. Guess what? You created your own story and your own event. If I show up twice and I can't get it, I'm going somewhere else to look. So what you don't know is that I tried your site twice, but after that, I started reaching out and asking others, where else could I go? And I went to other places. So sometimes we have to own when we have not done a distribution of rollout correctly, and say, maybe when I'm going to announce I'm going to be back at that site, you have to give me more information this time. Right. Because that was information you didn't get before. You didn't tell me there's only 200. Okay. Right. And then what you also didn't do while I was there is say, okay, we've had our 200, everyone else get in the line. But you allowed me to sit there for 2 hours just to tell me that you've given out 2 hours ago. That doesn't work. It creates, anxiety, distrust. So while I'm here teaching and others are teaching, trying to build up that trust, your action can tear that trust down. So we have to be careful about that. And the other thing that we have to also look at is we can't just educate one time and stop. And that's why the Black Nurses Association and also organizations such as our historical Black medical schools and the Black Coalition Against COVID. That's why we have this ongoing dialogue every week or every other week. We're out there. Now I will tell you that the Black nurses, we're out there every week, 3 and 4 times a week. Okay, because we recognized early on is, for example, when they made the right decision, Johnson vaccine, we had to be right there ready to explain why that was a good decision,
right?
Why it was a safe decision. Why no, it doesn't mean that the vaccine is not as good as the other vaccine. So we have to be there saying, this is evidence that the science is working. Right. That's what you want to do. You want to pull back, examine, and say, what are the causes of this? Is it everyone in the population, a certain people in the population, and which of that part of the population we need to have a conversation with and protect more? So to be able to say they did the right thing, they pulled it, they took a look at it, and they're still looking at the data. So that's why we just can't say this is one time and it's over. It has to be an ongoing conversation and relationship.
Absolutely. explaining all parts of the research process, the drug development process, the approval process. So, unpacking some of these things that, people have not had a reason or the background to delve into, and to really show how this these regulatory science and these processes were followed, and the close communications that so many of us did have as the vaccines were being developed and looking to diversify the trial, the populations that were being studied, and how transparent the FDA emergency use authorization process was, to give us confidence, and as you pointed out, for how it continues to be when it does catch a signal as the blood clotting issues, and what that means in terms of the confidence that people can have in the system, but also that there are folks like your organization, like mine, who are every day, throughout the day, continuing to watch and interact with this so that people can continue to have confidence in it. And that if as issues arise, we are actively working with the administration and the FDA and the CDC on how these processes are done and overseen. And so I think people want to know, like, we're on it, on their behalf, and then can explain what we're seeing and experiencing firsthand, and why we have confidence in it, and why we are ensuring that when I tell people, I'm like, yes, and my mother has been vaccinated, and my husband has been vaccinated, and I've been vaccinated, and and we're sharing this with our family members and our church members, then people can say, oh, well, if you really believe in it, if you're putting your own life and health and credibility and work behind it, then okay, I'll take that step with you. We're asking people to take this step with us as part of the community. And so I think that's what's so important about the long-term process that you have explained and are engaged in.
And I think, again, the word you just mentioned, long term, that is really so important, because everyone need to really truly understand what COVID-19 is. We know that it's a virus, okay? And we know that it's a living organism that looking for another living host that it can survive in. And so, we've heard some of the stories about some people, pets, catching COVID. But the most important thing is that if they can find a human and they can reside in us as their host, they're going to start multiplying. It's just not that one little single small virus that's going to be satisfied with being there. And that's the problem that we end up with when we end up with the medical conditions where we become critically ill, some of the people that contact this, and others do not. And that's what some people kind of debate and say, well, should I just take my chance? 50-50, I may get it and I may not. And I'm saying, no, you don't want to gamble with your life, because you don't know whether your body is going to build up those antibodies and going to be able to fight this virus off, or if your body is going to be one of those that's not going to be able to, and you end up with all of the severe problems. So I also try to explain to people, I need for you to understand that COVID-19 is a public health problem. It is not a medical problem. It's a public health problem that deals with the virus, that if you get it, then you have medical issues with it. Or you may not have those medical issues immediately. You could, quote unquote, recover from it, uh, and you feel okay. But now we've been into this now for almost a year and 5 months. So now we're having what we call the long hauler symptoms. Right. Those are people that are now just beginning to be able to help us to understand, because this was a new virus, in terms of the type of virus it was, Yes, it's kind of migrated from other viruses, but in terms of itself and the symptoms that it causes, We're just now understanding people that saying, well, I'm tired all the time. I keep having these rashes to reappear. My hair is coming out. I'm thinking, well, I'm just talking and I forget what I'm saying. We're calling the brain fog. We don't know what else to call it, you know. So there are symptoms, and so I don't want people to be misguided when they say someone has recovered from COVID.
Right.
The
You know,
correct terminology is they don't have acute symptoms, but now they have a pre-existing condition, just like someone with high blood pressure. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
no. This is such a robust conversation. I wanted to say that um, there is some very exciting patient-led research in long haul COVID that I have the opportunity to mentor and advise. And so we are exploring that. And I just want to make sure that people understand the point that science evolves and our understanding of this is evolving. It doesn't mean that we didn't know what we were talking about before, or because the information changes that they shouldn't have confidence in it. We're just learning more and updating the information as it goes. But I also wanted to get to, as this is a public health issue, and it is stacked on so many other issues about access to care and disparities in care that existed before COVID, existed during, were exacerbated by it, and will exist moving forward unless we do things differently. Patients, people of color have higher rates of obesity, of colon cancer, of liver cancer. Many of us have delayed care for months now or years, and we're seeing those conditions perhaps have worsened during this pandemic. And so as we think really holistically about addressing all of the social determinants of health and things that are factors in having optimal health, just a few words on the different things we need to consider when we want to put forward that really holistic, effective solution. We've
Thank you for bringing up
you know,
that piece of
climate health,
holistic.
yeah,
I really,
health,
because we do have to approach, and that's one thing COVID started the conversation again about the social determinants of health. But I want to be very deliberate and transparent here. Every time there is a major crisis in the United States, whether we're talking about Katrina or we're having tornadoes or hurricanes, we move right back to this conversation about there is a large segment of the US population that we call underrepresented individuals that we do not have the same access to care, healthcare as others. Now, our healthcare system, we are the most expensive healthcare system in the world. However, our health indicators are not in the top. Many times we have third world countries and other countries that are above the United States when it comes to certain health indicators. We take, for example, mother infants mortality. There are many developing countries that have much better outcomes than we do when we're looking at African Americans. Okay, when we look at sickle cell disease in the Black and Hispanic population, again, and this is, if you go to the state of Florida, they have more sickle cell population than any other collective group or state within the United States. So there are things we have to really begin to address, and we have to address these deliberately and say, when you're talking about the social determinant of health, you're talking about all of the bad policies, laws, and practices that took place before that person became sick. The social determinants are what we call those things that really cause bad health care has to do with education.
mm-hmm.
How well are we educating people in our public system? Who can get higher education? There are statistics and data and studies out there that would say that the more education you have, the more likely you're to have a healthy lifestyle. Okay. But even with that being said, Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans and Asian, we usually still going to receive not the top tier of healthcare in the United States, even if we have the same insurance. So that's been proven time and time again. So the other thing we have to talk about is the environment.
Right.
We have to talk about the fact that when you go into any state, and you can map this out, if it says the West End, that is almost where you're going to have your Black and brown population living. That's where you're going to have high air pollution, contaminated soils for some of the industries that are in those communities. You're going to have contaminated water. Okay, so you can go to West Chicago, West LA, the West End of Alabama. It goes on and on. It's the West End. That goes back to some of the redlining policies we had around housing. And so unless we're willing to deal with the issue upstream, we're going to continue to get the same thing downstream in terms of the determinants of health and poor health outcomes and poor education. All of those things are tied together. It's kind of like if I put Kool-Aid in the faucet and the pipeline upstream and I cut on the faucet, Kool-Aid is going to come out of the faucet.
I think that's an excellent point, and it points the direction towards our next 50 episodes of GLI Live. We have to understand that climate and environmental policy is health policy, that housing policy is health policy, that food and nutrition policy is certainly health policy. And so as we think about the next 50 episode and beyond of GLI Live and how we address those, I want to take a few moments and look back and give a tribute and thank you to everyone who contributed to these first 50 episodes. So we're going to go to a brief video and then we'll come back for a closing remark. So stay with us.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone, welcome. My name is Donna Cryer. I am the founder and CEO of the Global Liver Institute, a patient-driven advocacy organization that operates in the United States and Europe. We started GLI Live to provide information and connection to liver patients, people who are immunocompromised, cancer patients, but it's grown into so much more.
I've learned more from patients than I've probably ever learned from textbook or publications. And I think it's just, it takes doctors and patients being receptive to symptoms, outcomes, strategies, treatment. As we learn more about these diseases, we need to continue to come together in that form.
If I have a clinical trial that I give a new medication and it improves a biochemical value, a blood test, but the patient feels horrible, then we actually make a difference.
Right.
So it's when we think about the value of life, the value of health, we have to ask ourselves, what is important for the patient?
Now we're seeing patients a little bit in their home environment, and it is a little bit charming at times to see, maybe the patient and their spouse sitting on their couch in their living room surrounded by photographs of their loved ones.
We have to really get to the point of where our adult and pediatric hepatologists are really joining forces to start early with the kids and hopefully prevent them from even needing our care as adult hepatologists.
I think we really have the proof now from recent publications that we can change the fate of patients with chronic liver diseases. As an example, with the very effective treatment of hepatitis C. We have now data that patients with hepatitis C really disappeared from the transplant waiting list. And it was a main indication for transplantation a couple of years ago.
It's much easier to see a positive outcome in chronic disease as returning to full-time work or building a positive personal relationship, getting married, having kids, graduating, moving house, all these things that outside of a healthcare framework we really do consider to be achievements. And that's frankly a lot more gratifying and a lot more meaningful for both parties than a reduction in alkaline phosphatase or something more numerical, if that makes sense.
we're so glad that the clinicians, and you mentioned researchers and the research that the doctors have done. That's so important to know that people who still have their wits about them and they're fighting for us. And all we have to do is keep jumping over those bars because someone's fighting for us to help keep us alive.
And the people that work towards, kind of organ donation in this country work very, very hard. And their motives are very good and they're trying to save as many lives as they can. But the truth is the process of being an organ donor in this country, the way you have to pass away, the way you have to be on life support, the way the organs have to be recovered are so specific and unnecessarily complicated that it already decreases the amount of available organs we have to save our lives.
Transplantation should be and can be for everyone, and we want to work to make it so.
Patients are recovering both physically, but they're recovering emotionally too. There are a lot of feelings and emotions that people experience after liver transplant.
A couple months ago, as I posted my story, and a friend responded and said, "Oh my gosh, thank you for posting it." Mm-hmm. She had just taken both of her kids to their pediatricians, mm-hmm. and they had been tested for fatty liver and came back at F2. So wow. This problem is a generational thing. It's not just, as I'm looking at us, it's not just a grandparent thing. It's not an older adult thing. It is mm-hmm. our next generation. It is our future. And we need to stop it now before mm-hmm. it gets any further.
Thank you particularly to nurses of color who are on the front lines every day before this pandemic and after.
Why worry twice? Yeah. Why think about a situation in your life where you were worried about something? It could be about your own health. It could be, anything at all. And what happens is you worry about that, and then that's not what happens. It's something completely unexpected. Mm-hmm. And you have wasted all of that time worrying about something that's not going to happen.
Ask the question. Because the chances are someone else in that room is thinking the same things.
I always tell my patients, mm-hmm. you are not a liver with leg. Ironically.
We need to make sure we have that diversity as mm-hmm. we're creating the scientific pool of individuals who are looking and addressing this issue.
This idea of life is living. And when we talk about resilience, what I'd like to think about is what creates the maximal opportunity to live.
My intentions were completely different from COVID. My intentions was actually to bring a smile of happiness and a surprise that when women opened those boxes and they were waiting for a liver, they would jump out of joy because now people could look at them and say, mm-hmm. oh, how beautiful your mask right. is. So
and they are beautiful. I mean, it seems like too beautiful to wear.
And I thoroughly believe that healthcare begins with self-care. Right. So if we are going to look after ourselves, we need to look after ourselves, mind, body, and soul.
What I learned with Hamilton was that my business throughout the day completely affected what I brought into how ready I was for the show. And that's, it goes both ways.
I was pregnant with my second child when my dad got the call that he had to be at the hospital in half an hour because he had the wonderful opportunity to have a new lease on life.
So I think that policymakers need to understand that prevention is key. So where you can prevent, you should prevent. And that comes with access to food, access to education, access to a culture and a way of life that is centered around wellness and longevity.
And I think we are in a place with this administration and with advocates like GLI, that public health, it's time for this ship to go into places it has never gone before, to seek out new people who have been left behind and to provide new services where there was not a lot of hope.
So
that was great.
thank
Wonderful.
you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to final note, thank the nurses, the doctors, the social workers, the patient advocates in the United States, in Brazil, in England, in Scotland, in Ethiopia, and the many countries that our guests came from, and the many of you who are watching in dozens of countries around the world. You have made this so special for me and for the team at the Global Liver Institute. And we look forward to serving you better with these next 50, 100, 150 episodes. And we also want to thank our COVID-19 response sponsors and supporters, Bristol Myers Squibb, Boehringer Ingelheim, Novartis, Pharma, and Travere, without which this would not have been possible as we created all this new technology and outreach. And so I just want to say thank you again. Stay well and stay connected. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank